And we're back in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of this happy, very happy for certain people, Friday morning into afternoon here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Well, today is a historically important day, but more importantly than that, it is a great day to be a New York Yankees baseball fan, and not such a terrific day if you're a diehard Yankee hater, or dare I say, a Boston Red Sox fan. That's the way it goes in baseball. Thought the Yankees were doomed in the seventh inning the other night. We had the knives out, right, for Aaron Boone because he left Rodon. The great thing about fans is you have a first guess, a second guess, and they took, Aaron Boone, if you really think that Aaron Boone is making these decisions. But Aaron Boone took Fried out too soon, even though they don't like to push pitchers much above 100. Took him out too soon. But then he left Rodon in too long. So whatever you do, but they got through game two, and I was pretty confident going into last night. I was just looking at it in terms of statistics, and in half of Cam Schlittler's starts, the other team really wasn't able to mount any kind of a sustained offense, and I figured that it was probably 50-50. Not that he was going to go 8 innings with 12 strikeouts, but I thought it was 50-50 that he was going to give them the kind of game they needed, which would be like, I would have signed up. Who wouldn't have signed up for 1 run in 5 innings, right? Something like that is phenomenal in an elimination game. But October 3rd, 2025, that is today's date, but October 3rd is also not just a day to temporarily celebrate the pause that refreshes, get ready to go to Toronto. We all know Toronto, tough series coming up. But the Yankees seem to be in pretty good position. Now you're in the main draw of the tournament, like the preliminaries are over, or in the immortal words of Kiefer Sutherland and the Lost Boys, initiation is over, Michael. Time to join the club. It's time for the 2025 American League and National League postseason proper. On this day, there's 3 big on this days. On this day, 1951, October 3rd, 1951, the single greatest, most famous, most iconic, most historically important, legendary home run in baseball history was struck by a guy on the New York Baseball Giants, now the San Francisco Giants, against the Brooklyn Dodgers, now the Los Angeles Dodgers, in a best-of-3 playoff, or play-in if you prefer, series, with the New York Baseball Giants down a run and 2 men on with 1 out. Bobby Thomson off of Ralph Branca hit a 3-run homer, kind of just snuck over the wall in left field. Andy Pafko, who had made some big plays earlier in the season. He was a good outfielder, but there was nothing but he could do but watch helplessly as the ball sailed probably 30 or 40 feet over his head. Bobby Thompson's home run, which put the 1951 New York Baseball Giants into the World Series, and the other historical marker was that the Giants cheated. They cheated. They had some kind of for 1951 system that allowed them to make up a 13-game deficit on I keep saying Los Angeles, on the Brooklyn Dodgers to even get to the playoff situation where the team split the first 2 games. Giants won the first, Dodgers won the second, and Bobby Thompson's walk-off home run with 1 out in the 9th inning sent the Giants to the World Series, where they would play who? And lose to who? The New York Yankees. It would be the Yankees' 3rd consecutive World Series victory, 1949-1950. They beat the Giants in 51 in 6 games, despite the fact the Giants took game 1, but it's also a historically important season. 1951 was Mickey Mantle's rookie year. I don't know if it was Willie Mays' rookie year, but it was very early in Willie Mays' career, and it was the last season for top 5 greatest players in the history of the game, Joltin' Joe DiMaggio. So October 3rd, 1951, the shot heard around the world, the most famous home run in baseball history, struck by Bobby Thomson. Also on that same exact day, October 3rd, 1951, David Mark Winfield was born. So Dave Winfield, Major League Baseball Hall of Famer, and generally regarded as one of the greatest athletes who ever lived, the man who was drafted in 3 professional sports, baseball, football, And basketball, Dave Winfield was born. So a happy birthday to Big Dave. And the other one is that 30 years ago today, on October 3rd, 1995, the New York Yankees were back in the playoffs, as I've discussed a few times, that incredible rally that the team put together, going 25-6 in the stretch run of the 1995 season, the first season with the old version of the wild card. It's incredible to think we're seeing the old version of the wild card. It doesn't seem like that long ago, but where you only had one wild card. You had 3 divisions in each league, but one wild card. And good thing for the Yankees, because the Red Sox beat them out of sight in 1995. But the Yankees snagged the wild card, and even though they ended the 1995 season with a better record by 1 game than both the Mariners and Angels, and they had a playoff game to see who was even going to get to the wild card round, the ALDS. The Yanks had a better record, but technically the Mariners had home field advantage. But that was not, they didn't think that one through, because the first 2 games were at the stadium. And on this day, 1995, Game 1 of the American League Division Series, according to many people who were in the ballpark that night, whether it's Michael Kay, whether it's John Sterling, or whether it would be Mike Lupica, or Tom Verducci, Marty Noble, who I don't know if is still with us, but also Jack Curry, who wrote for the New York Times, and now, of course, with the Yes Network, Michael Kay, who covered that. I think he was still working with the Daily News at the time, but he was in the broadcast booth working with John Sterling, Michael Kay. They will all vouch for the fact the loudest they ever heard the old building, the original, the OG house that Ruth built, was in the first 2 games of the 95 Division Series, because the Yankees had not seen any postseason action in 14 years since I'm just saying it, the disaster that was the 1981 World Series. Great World Series if you're a Dodgers fan. But the Yankees lost games 3, 4, and 5 after taking the first 2 pretty easily at home. They lost 3 horrible games in LA, came home for game 6, had the lead, blew that too, and more or less got blown out of game 6. And without the extra layers of playoffs, all those Yankee teams in the 90s winning 87 games, 90 games, 92 games, 97 games in 1985, no postseason, nothing, nothing. But in 1995, they made it back to the postseason. And because the Mariners had to use Randy Johnson to get into the postseason, I think Randy beat Mark Langston in the playoff or play-in game, however you want to describe it. Like the Bucky Dent game was technically game number 163 of the 1978 season, even though that's informally known as a 1-game playoff. Those stats counted. Ron Guidry's 25th win was in the 163rd game of the 1978 season. But 30 years ago today, this Yankees fan was over the moon with excitement that we had playoff baseball, and not only playoff baseball, but playoff baseball starting in the Bronx. And that Yankee team had just scrambled, and that desperate charge to get to the postseason. And then they went out, and game 1 was very close. I think Ken Griffey Jr. hit 2 home runs. David Cohn had a lead, and then they got to him. And it looked like the Yankees were in control. They're up 4-2 going to the 7th. Griffey tied the game with a homer. And then in the bottom half of the 7th, the Yanks just beat the crap out of it. I mean, that Mariners team had an all-time great offense with Griffey and guys like, Paul Sorrento and Jay Buhner and the first generation Tino Martinez. They were just tremendous on that side of the ball. I forgot Edgar Martinez, Hall of Famer. They were just a dynamic offensive force. Bullpen wasn't that great. And other than Randy, they had guys who were decent pitchers, like Chris Bosio, who started game 1. And the Yanks hit him hard, but, they got 3-4 runs off him. And then who else they had? Andy Benes, who was kind of an all-star caliber pitcher at the time. But the Yankees blew the game open. They blew the game open in the 7th. They got 4 in the 7th, and that they ended up winning the game. Ruben Sierra sort of put the game out of reach with, one of his classic skyscraping home runs, and then he's styling and profiling, as Walt Frazier would say, at home plate, pulling on his jersey, putting the mustard on it, doing all the hot dog and stuff. That was so awesome. And you really had the sense that year that despite the fact the Yankees record and I always say this, but it was a strike shortened season. There were only 144 games for the Yankees in that regular season. They went 79-65. But the way they finished, they seemed like they should have been a 90-win team. I don't think they would have gotten to 90 wins. They would have gotten, 88 or 89, like the Red Sox this year ended with 89 wins. But you think of, from the fan perspective, when you know that you are at worst a live underdog going after the big prize, going after a World Series, that no one is going to be shocked if you win. And in 95, if the Yankees had gotten by Seattle, because they took the first 2 games at home, the second game, which I'm probably going to talk about tomorrow, is one of the 10 greatest games in the history of Major League Baseball. That's how incredible of a 15-inning baseball game it was. Lead changes in both directions, both teams scoring in extra innings, but the game continuing. Just crazy stuff. But the Yankees had played really well against the Cleveland Indians that year. And there was a sense that in a 7-game series, despite the fact that Cleveland was 144, the Yanks were a live underdog in that series if it got to it. Unfortunately, it just didn't happen. They didn't get there. They lost all 3 in Seattle, the home field, as we just saw in the previous 3 days with the Yankees and Red Sox. The fact that the Yankees had the 3 home games, it really felt like it did something. So to bring it back to current day, we had Bobby Thomson, we had Dave Winfield, and we had 30 years ago, the old ballpark once again rocking big time for playoff baseball for the first time in 14 years. Well, you knew the fans were going to be there. And I don't mean to drag on any multimillionaires or corporate, types that are in the stadium, but however they managed to figure out that felt like real fans, not just people filling seats to try to impress their business associates. And there ain't nothing wrong with that. You can do that, but you got to support your team. Having said that, I'm not on board with the theory and the idea Mike Francesa and other people have talked about that the Yankee front office tried to deliberately freeze out Red Sox fans from getting tickets. Like, that's funny, but that's also not cool and not something that should have been done. But when I saw that, I'm sorry. I thought that was a fucking riot. That seems like a George Steinbrenner move. I don't think that George ever did that, even in 2003, because in those years, in those kind of classic great, Don Zimmer and Pedro Martinez fighting and all that shit, that would seem to be something that would have been done, but it wasn't, because there were a lot of Boston fans in attendance at all the games at the old stadium in 2003 and 2004 and 1999 as well. I forgot about that for that matter. But the excitement in the ballpark when the Yankees finally nosed ahead in Game 2, and you felt comfortable, with Bednar, and as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, Bednar looks like John Wetland in terms of the way that the comportment on the mound. He doesn't have the same type of, I shouldn't say he doesn't have the same type of delivery. Wetland had a much bigger arch to his delivery with his arm movement. Bednar is much tighter with his arm movements, but the stuff is similar to prime Wetland. And the Yankees didn't quite ever see prime John Wetland. I feel like his absolute prime ended after the 94 season, which he spent with the now long gone Montreal Expos, and the Yankees got him. And the first half of 95, Wetland was lights out. He was just phenomenal. He had a wipeout curveball. It was kind of a slurve, and he was throwing upper 90s fastball with good life, good movement. But he never recaptured that in the next year and a half, because the second half of 95, he was kind of pedestrian. And 96, he was okay, but Mariano was their best pitcher that year, even though Pettit, finished second for the Cy voting behind, I believe, Pat Henkin. Henkin was tremendous that year. Oh, no, not Pat Henkin. It was Roger Clemens that won, I think. No. Henkin won in 96 and Clemens won in 97. That's what it was. I get my years mixed up sometimes. But Wetland just didn't, the Thunder never returned to his fastball. He just didn't throw quite as well. But Bednar has the same kind of stuff as Wetland, meaning an upper 90s fastball that he has the ability to locate as Wetland, even when his stuff was a bit diminished. He was very, very good at putting the ball where he wanted to. It's just, if he lost a tick off of his fastball, hitters could get on top of it that previously they weren't going to be able to. But it's the breaking stuff with Bednar that sets him apart. He has a fantastic break on his curveball, slider, or whatever it is that he throws there. It rarely rolls into the strike zone. And every now and then when Wetland, the 96 era Wetland would throw that curveball, it would just kind of, as he put it, would kind of cookie right into the hitting zone, and they have to almost close your eyes that they don't barrel it up. But I felt very confident going into last night's game because of, what I mentioned, the fact that Cam Schlittler had pitched great at least half the time. I think he gave up either one run or less because they didn't really stretch him out that much in half of the starts that he made since coming up in July. And we had a couple of times he got blasted and beat around. And let me tell you something, even you throwing 100 miles an hour, but if you can't locate, you're going to get hit. It's just the way that it goes. That's why speed isn't enough. As we've seen with other pitchers throwing 100 miles an hour, they really have difficulty getting anybody out because they're not able to locate anywhere near where they're trying to throw the baseball. But I was confident that they were going to win. I thought it was at least 3 out of 4. Even knowing nothing about the Red Sox pitcher, also a rookie, who I can admit he deserved better than he got because the Red Sox defense, they let him down. And you could argue that the play with Jarren Duran in the second game, you got to make that catch. And certainly we saw last year, the last game of the World Series, right? The Yankees. And sometimes it's the guys that are good fielders like Aaron Judge. The only time I've ever seen Aaron Judge since 2017 not make a catch on a ball that was hit to him, it happened to come in Game 5 of the World Series. And you saw the first baseman last, and it wasn't an easy play. But that's a Gold Glove first baseman playing for Boston. The ball took a weird hop and it bounced off his glove. And then in a big spot for the Yankees, you saw Anthony Volpe make a pick on a terrible throw from Jazz Chisholm. And Volpe has struggled, right? We wanted to bench him not only because he struck out every time up, but because the kid suddenly can't field. And Volpe has come to play. The only run they scored in the first game was his homer. He had a big hit last night, a sort of seeing eye, almost a Luis Sojo in the 2000 World Series 82 hopper that somehow finds outfield grass. Again, sometimes you just get lucky in baseball. But you just felt like the Red Sox had their chance when they left Rodon in arguably too long and they weren't able to get the bunt down. And, the joke was that Cruz was a shortstop, so of course he's going to catch the pop-up bunt. He's not running out of the way. They always tell pitchers, if it's above your head, get the fuck out of the way. Let one of the infielders get it. But you just don't know what's going to happen. But certainly when they put up the big crooked number of 4 runs in the fourth, it really did feel like we're going through to the next round. But the thing is, though, because baseball, from the fan perspective, can be cruel. And there have been those times where, and Yankee fans of an older generation will talk about this, in a game they ended up winning, just again to go with the history. Game 5, 1976, what's otherwise known as, we had the Bucky Dent game yesterday, but Game 5, 1976, ALCS was only a best of 5. Remember, there was no division playoffs at that particular time. It was 2 games apiece, Yankees and Royals. That was the George Brett Royals. Brett was just about hitting his peak, and what a fucking legend. What a monster hitter George Brett was. A great player. Just awesome. Certainly top 10, I would say, greatest left-handed hitters in the history of the major leagues. Just an amazing player. But the Yankees that night, Game 5, home game, right? Fans are all ready to go crazy. You've got a couple of thousand police officers on site because there had been some issues. 2 nights earlier, no, not 2 nights. The previous night, ladies and gentlemen, The Bronx is Burning, that famous, and it became a book and a mini series on ESPN 20 years ago. But there was a sense when the Yankees broke out to a lead, they had a 3-run lead, and it just seemed like a recoronation. We're going back to the World Series. And at that point, the Yanks hadn't been in a World Series in 14 years. The same 14, not 14 years. I'm sorry. They hadn't won a World Series in 14 years. In the case of the Yankees in 95, they hadn't won a World Series in 17 years. And they hadn't been to postseason, in that case, a World Series in 14 years. But in 76, the Yankees appeared to be in control. You had Grant Jackson out there, who had been a tough pitcher, a starter. He's in as a reliever. And the Yanks have a 3-run lead in the 8th inning. They're popping champagne. We just got to get another 5 outs, 4 outs, whatever it is. And George Brett hits a tying home run. You go from being 96% or whatever you could look back on because they could do the metrics. It's all done by computer. The Yanks are like 96% to win that game. And suddenly they're no better than 52 or 53%. And you just say to yourself, this felt like we were destined to win. This isn't supposed to happen. This is not fair. This is not right. And if they had lost that game, it would have been a next level gut punch. But the Yanks ended up surviving a very tense top of the ninth inning where there were a few very razor thin calls. If there had been a replay challenge, one of those calls, they had like a man on first and no out, and there was a force at second, which maybe wasn't a force at second. But then Chris Chambliss hit the home run, the walk-off, where 10,000 people streamed the field. And as Howard Cosell said, what an incredible ending to the 1976 American League season. And in the booth that night was not only Howard Cosell and Keith Jackson, but another Jackson by the name of Reginald Martinez Jackson, who in a few months was going to sign a free agent contract, and his own October Magic, Mr. October, was 1 year away. But this Yankee team underachieved for enormous stretches of this season, as we've talked about. They had an 81-game stretch where they basically played 500 ball. But they closed the season 34-12. That's how they get to 94 wins. 94 wins, that's a big team. That's a big season, especially with all the parity and so many teams in the low to middle 80s as far as victories. But a 94-win team, they closed at 34-12. So now if you want to go pull it a little further, they're 36-13 in their last 49. And I kept telling people in August when they were playing better, I said, I think this is the team that they should be, because they started, they broke out to a big lead. They broke out to a big lead, 42-25. And this is a better roster, and they didn't have Cam Schlittler. This is a better roster than they started the season with. They didn't have Bednar. They didn't have all of these other guys like McMahon making the incredible catch, shades of Derek Jeter in 2004 getting busted up. We're lucky that he landed properly. My God, you start imagining you could get seriously injured. I'm not joking around there. He could have gotten seriously hurt if he had landed on his head. If he lands at the wrong angle, you don't even want to think about it. Is it that important to win a baseball game? I mean, that's arguable. In the case of Jeter, he knew that the worst thing that was going to happen, he might have a facial fracture. He wasn't going to break his neck or suffer a spinal cord injury the way that he went in. Jeter knew he was probably going to take a shot like a boxer getting hit, and that's more or less what it was. But McMahon made that incredible catch last night. And as a fellow 94-win team to the Jays, and all the credit to the Jays, working within the system and the rules which said there's not going to be an extra game to see who wins the American League East. Tough shit on the Yankees, but the Jays had to win the last 3 games of the season because the Yankees won the last 3 games. And to their credit, I mean, only one of those games was competitive. They beat the Rays mostly from here to there as the Yankees sort of took care of business with the Orioles. But this Yankees team, they are a title contender. And right now, they look like the best team in the American League. That the pieces are clicking. And, Judge and Stanton, they kind of had their moments in this series. If the Yanks had rallied in game 1, Judge's single off Chapman would have been, looked upon as a bigger hit, but they ended up not scoring after loading the bases with no out. But I feel like they're in position to beat Toronto. Even though Toronto has gotten to set their rotation and get everything together, they don't really have as much of a home field kind of advantage, if you will, as the Yankees. But we'll see. This is a 5-game series coming up. And the Yanks will probably start either Will Warren or Luis Gil. It wouldn't be Max Fried's day. I wish that it were. If there was one more off day, then it would be. But they'll probably go either Luis Gil or Will Warren, and just hope they, maybe they face Gausman, or I'm not sure if Gausman would be going for Toronto. But they got to put some points on the board, as you say. And maybe this series, maybe Judge, because I believe that a lot of this is not so much luck of the draw, but there is a lot of randomization in baseball. And if you hang around in the playoffs long enough, you're going to have a big series when you have the kind of talent that Judge does. So one of these 5-game series, Judge is going to hit 4 homers. One of these 7-game series, he's going to hit 5 homers. It's inevitable because it's the nature of baseball. So hopefully this is the series, because maybe the Yankee pitching doesn't do as well. They were tremendous. In all 3 games of the series, the Yankee pitching was fantastic. They're going to have a game where they give up 6 or 7 runs. We need that to be the game where Judge knocks in 5. And then we end up winning that game. So a happy day in Yankee land. And I hope that I didn't bore you with a little bit of the history, more than a little bit of the history. But as we sit on October 3rd, 2025, with an eye on the important events that took place in baseball history, but in Yankee history in particular, and baseball lore, such as Dave Winfield, former Yankee, of course, and the Bobby Thomson home run, which is the same age, 74 years, as David Mark Winfield. I think he might be the only guy who was drafted in 3 sports. Now, to be fair, he didn't play football in college. He was a basketball player. He probably could have made the NBA. I think they took him in the 3rd round. Was it? I think Minnesota drafted him in football. They thought that his skill sets, the fact that he was a big dude with obviously the unbelievable hand-eye coordination of a baseball player, they felt that he had the physical attributes to be a legitimate tight end. That was not just for show, that draft pick. They thought that if he wanted to play football, they were going to turn him into a terrific tight end. But happy birthday, Big Dave. Happy birthday to the shot heard around the world. Happy birthday to the 30th anniversary of the Yankees' return to the postseason and then winning the World Series the next 4 of the next 5 years after the disappointment of the 1995 postseason, the way it ended in Seattle and that awful ballpark, the Kingdome. No offense, Safeco Field is much better, but it is a happy, even joyous day in Yankee land. And, well, let's just see what happens. Go into the division series starting tomorrow. And, it's baseball, Susan, as John Sterling famously said to his radio partner, Susan Waldman. It's very difficult to predict it. And certainly when Yankee fans were giving up the ghost and demanding accountability, we need Hal Steinbrenner to sell the team. We got to fire Boone. We got to fire Cashman. Maybe we need to cut this guy, cut that guy, cut Volpe. Don't ever let Devin Williams pitch again. I'm glad that didn't happen because we certainly wouldn't have won this series without the much maligned Devin Williams. Anyway, I've rattled on long enough. October 3rd, 2025, a village of the nice, happy people, kumbaya kind of day in baseball, and especially if you're a fan of the boys from the Bronx. This has been episode 617 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Friday morning into early afternoon here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, and go Yankees.